recording is on. I didn't want to miss having this presentation. So if you have...
Kate,
yeah?
I'm sorry, recording won't go on until you show your screen.
Okay, it is recording. It says it is recording.
It'll record the audio.
It'll be just audio? I can show my screen, but it's fine. It does say it's recording. Okay, so if you have not had a chance to see the PowerPoint that I'm going to show today, this PowerPoint is posted on our in our resources section on our community website. If you go to the post that Laura put up that listed all the sessions, I have a post underneath that links to where these documents will be posted. They're posted by the Wednesday before each session. We will modify these documents to try and incorporate the input that we get from these sessions. So they are living documents. We'll try and keep them up to date with whatever feedback we get from these sessions. Okay? All right. Here we go. Okay. So I think everyone on the call knows what publications and headings are used for, but we have a few different ways that we use publications and headings, and it sometimes causes us our own set of problems because we try and make publications and headings do quite a lot of very different things. Mainly they're used as a custom classification system. So besides the built-in classification systems we might have like the taxonomy or the thesaurus, publications allow you to create your own classification system, which may be more or less complex than any of those standardized classification systems. So where are they used? The obvious one is on our front page quick list. It will either have a list of publications or a list of headings. It can also be used as a custom classification system for a very targeted resource. So if you have, say, a dementia group, or I know the GAIN in Southern Ontario, they have often sort of older persons issues where they have their own list of things that they are trying to target, topics that they are trying to target that are very specialized to the kind of work they're doing. So that's frequently how they're used. Creating print subject indexes and special descriptions for print publications, and also selecting records for specialized views, not just for specialized views, but for exporting, for running your publications, all kinds of things where we need to select a group of records that are manually selected as opposed to a search you might perform to bring up a list. So you've, in effect, gathered a group of records together, tagged them all as belonging to a certain classification, and you have a way to quickly bring those records up. So what do we know about publications and headings that isn't working? Number one is the terminology. Those who are in Ontario and who have been involved in the sector for a really long time are very used to the terms publications and general headings because they've been around since probably the 70s. But for anyone new coming on, the idea of calling these things publications and general headings is incredibly confusing and very misleading. Often when people think of publications, they automatically associate it with a printed publication and therefore assume that they're somehow tightly connected, when in fact the way that we use publications and headings these days may have absolutely nothing to do with a printed publication. And in fact, you can run printed publications entirely separate from the idea of a publication code. So we have a terminology issue there that we're aware of, and we really do need to consider whether we need to rename those things and come up with something more suitable for the way that we actually use them, and something that new users will be able to understand without a big grand explanation about what a publication code is and what a general heading is. Because currently, unless you have the background to understand why those things started out with those names, it's just completely confusing. The other problem we know we have is that publications are used for many completely different purposes. Often, although we offer a distribution code or other ways of tagging records, publication codes are by far the one that's used the most, and that's because of the ability to put it on the quick list for the most part. That means that sometimes we're using publications in a way that's really overkill for what we're trying to get out of it. So if we're just trying to tag some records for a simple list, having the overhead of a publication, which includes the ability to do general headings and descriptions and all kinds of extra information that gets tied into that publication, is potentially overkill. It also means when we're trying to use it for a simple purpose, such as identifying which records belong in a given view, and you have 250 different publications in your database, trying to identify the one that's appropriate, name them appropriately, and ensure that each one is used in only the way that it was intended to be used becomes more and more difficult. All right, next, there is no ability to set an owner for a publication. Right now, you either have the ability to edit publications or you don't. And if you do have the ability to edit publications, you can edit all the publications. There's no ability for one agency to, say, take control of a publication and be the only agency that's allowed to index to that publication or control it, update it, give it a new name, change its code, and so on. And that both means extra clutter because every agency in a database has to pretty much use everybody else's publication codes, whether they like it or not. And it also means there's no ability to take personal control over a publication. So if someone else decides to tag a bunch of records with your code, that you really do not want them to do that because you had a very particular use of that code in mind, you have no way to control them doing that kind of an action. So we know that there is an ownership issue and a use case for saying, you know, this group exclusively owns this publication code and only people from this group can manage or index to that publication code. We do have some small ability to deal with this in that on a view basis, you can pick particular publications to show for that view and only show those publications there. And we do have the ability to limit people to editing just one set of general headings instead of the entire list of publications and all their headings. But it really doesn't have the same security model that I'm talking about here of having a true owner of a publication and some exclusivity over who can do that work. Another big issue, really from a performance point of view, is that we historically had something called a publication description that could be attached to a publication code. In the database itself, every time you tag a record with a publication, you're actually putting a little spot in there for a description. And the reality these days is those publication descriptions are rarely used in proportion to the amount of publication indexing that people do. So even if one publication in your database has publication descriptions in it, every single publication code that you add to every single record in your database has a spot to add a publication description. And that means that there's a lot of extra overhead put in place to manage these descriptions for what is really quite a rare use these days. It's not used as often as it might have been, both because people aren't producing as many print publications and also because the standards for the description field and how much content is put in them has changed significantly to the point that people don't have to do as much trimming of the information to fit it into a printed publication. In addition, we've now allowed people to create as many extra fields as they need. So in effect, if they needed to create a special field for, you know, my Blue Book description, they could just create extra Blue Book and put their description for the Blue Book in there. And there really isn't a need anymore to tie it specifically to a publication code and therefore move it out of the regular management of the record. Because as I'm sure most of you are aware, if you do want a publication description, you have to go into the publication management area and manage the description there. It isn't part of the regular update form. So we need to really think about whether publication descriptions really still have a place in our software, whether they should be converted into extra fields for anyone who's using them now, and therefore we could potentially ditch publication descriptions entirely and remove some of that overhead and the extra uses of the publication that we have now. Just something for discussion. The other thing we've run into so frequently is a need for subcategories within the system of general headings. So at a top level, we have our publication codes, but at a lower level, we have a single level of general headings. And the reality of how people use those general headings is half or more of the time, people actually have more than one level within those general headings or need for more than one level. So a top level heading and then a subcategory or even more depth than that. And our current general heading system does not allow that kind of relationship to be set up. You can set up relationships between headings, say they're related to one another. You can have unused headings, use references if you will, for headings, but no ability to say that one heading is a subcategory of another heading. And that comes up again and again, both for people needing it on a quick list and just generally wanting a search for, let's say, a higher category to automatically bring up anything that's listed under the lower heading category. So if my main category was food and one of my subcategories was emergency food, then what people would like to have happen is if someone did a search under the food heading, it would automatically bring up anyone who had the subcategory of emergency food. So similar to how the taxonomy might work. I'm going to take a quick pause. I don't see any flashing questions, but does anyone have anything that they would like to comment on or ask a question on what I have covered so far before I move to the next slide? I have a hand up. Mary, you'd like to be unmuted? You are unmuted. Oh, you can't talk though. Okay, if you'd like to just type your question, Mayra, and I'd be happy to answer. Give Mayra a second here. Do publication descriptions equal publication notes? Excellent question, Mayra. No, they are not the same. So a publication note is a way for you to describe the publication to yourself. A publication note tells you how that publication is intended to be used. So it's a note for you, and it's really only in the setup area of the software that you can see the publication note. It's not visible anywhere else in the software at this time. Whereas a publication description is actually added to the record. So if I have a publication tag 211 and I want to add a special description that just applies to the 211 records, then when I tag that record with the code 211, I have the ability to add a special description for the record underneath the pub code 211. So it's special text that's attached to the record with the publication code, and there's one per record, as opposed to a publication note, which applies to the publication as a whole and is really a note internally for you to understand how to use the publication. Does that clarify for you, Mayra? I can show on the software if anyone's at all confused about what we mean by publication notes. It's going to take a minute to bring up. And I warn you, I'm using development software here. I have other versions open in case my software is broken. Aha, yeah, my software's broken. Okay. I'll use the test site. I kind of knew that was going to happen. We're in major reno mode of the software right now, so my local copy tends to be broken a lot. Okay, here are publication notes. So this is when I am actually editing the publication itself, and this is for me to say to myself, this publication is for tagging telehealth records. And then you could say what criteria you might use. You know, this includes hospitals, etc. You know, whatever it is that you wanted to tell yourself about how that publication is intended to be used. It's really a reference for data managers to have an understanding of how they're going to use that publication. So it's different than the name, which is really short. The publication notes, you can give lots and lots of detail. So this is where you might have inclusion criteria for how you decide whether or not a record gets included in that publication. We do know that we should have the publication notes available to you at the time that you're adding publications. So one of the things we can look at as an enhancement potentially is when you're actually in the form adding publication codes to your records, we can have a mouse over so that if you put your mouse over the publication code or name, it would pop out the note so you could see a description of what that publication was used for. Okay? Do you want me to demonstrate a publication description as well? Okay, yes, I have a yes. A couple of yeses. All right, here we go. Let's demo a description. Just going to any random record here. Niagara Dolphin Society. Sounds good. I'll update publications. Okay, so this particular record has headings. I'm going to add a description to it as well. So right here, if I hit Insert Current Description from Reading, this is a publication description. So if I am doing a short printed publication on animal programs in Niagara region, and the regular descriptions are sometimes far too big for my record. Let's say I know some people have descriptions of 8,000 characters. You know, it's completely out of scale for what would be a small publication. This allows you to take the current description, pare it down to be something more brief, and then in our print tools you can actually use some special codes to have it check first for a publication description, and if there's no publication description, use the regular description. So that's a neat little way where you only have to have a publication description if it's different from the regular description, but it allows you for those small print publications to pare down your giant descriptions or to remove HTML tags or whatever else you might want to do for some special uses of that record. That would be a modification of the regular description. It also allows you to do things like for those special use publications that you might have for a special client, allow them to create their own descriptions for their own purposes, where they might have to keep some information that's different from the other information you keep on your record. And by putting it in the publication description, they're doing it discreetly. And you can, in fact, give them permission to add a description to the publication without giving them any other update privileges on the record whatsoever. That is one of the advantages we have in publication descriptions over, say, extra fields and other things. But you can always make them a form that only had that one field on it. So there's ways around it. Okay. I have a question here. Let me make sure I've seen it. Does this have to be done per record? So Mary, yes, this particular description is per record, but you don't have to do it for every record. So like, at least if you're using CIOC's built-in print tools, let's say, you wouldn't have to include this for every record. You would only include it where it was relevant. So if you were doing some kind of major editing work because you had one of those 8,000 character descriptions and you needed it to be down to one small paragraph, our print tools allow you to do that just for some and have it check. If there's a publication description, use that. And if there's no publication description, use the regular description. So you wouldn't have to enter this for every record. It's really a case of you would enter it when you need to. But really, the publication description is open for you to use it as you wish. So you don't even have to put a description in here. You can put any data you want in here. It becomes a special field in the software, so one that you can add to your record details and so on. Anyone who isn't aware how to add it to your record details form is you have to click Field Use, Allow and Display in Forms. And as soon as you do that, your headings field and your description field will become available to you as a field to add to your record details forms and your feedback forms and so on. Okay, so that clears questions. Please feel free anytime to ask a question, and I will get to them at a sort of a good break moment. But I get a little flashy signal so I can tell that it's there. All right, that's it for this slide. I'll move on to the next. Feel free to go back if you think of a question later for something on this slide. Okay. Try try and figure out the best way to describe this. We have cases where people have, and this may be in part solved by some of our general headings issues around categories and subcategories. But we have cases where people need to search on two different factors at the same time. The example that I'm going to give in this PowerPoint presentation is a type of service together with a target population, which most of you are familiar with doing, say, through the taxonomy, where you might pick a particular kind of service and say it applies to one particular target group. The idea here being that on your search form, you allow people to do what is basically two quick lists. The idea that first you're going to pick a topic, a general subject area, and second you might pick some other factor that applies. Method of delivery, target population, as I said. There's many different ways that this could come about. There's also things like having multiple diagnoses or other things that I have heard come up within our membership over the years, where people need to be able to search two different items at the same time. And currently, we don't allow that. You can't do a search within two sets of general headings at the same time, nor can you break up publications into two distinct lists and allow people, especially on the front page, to easily pick from one list and another list and use those together in a compound way. But we know that this is a requirement that some people have, especially with those special groups who are trying to serve a particular population with very particular needs, where mode of delivery is essential, but mode of delivery by itself is a useless thing to search on. They need mode of delivery and a particular type of service together to determine that that is the service that they're looking for. So that's one issue that we've identified. Next. Publication information on the main data entry form. So everybody who's ever used a publication knows you have a completely separate management area for publications. And this is done on purpose because it has completely different privileges for how updating takes place. You can add publications to a record that you don't in any way own and don't have any permission to do any updating on. And therefore, you don't have to go into the update form in order to do all of that publication management. The negative side of that is for people who do have both updating privileges and publication privileges. We're not giving those people any means to do it all at once and add any of that publication information right into their update form to simplify their data management processes. So there's lots of different ways we could try and address this. The reality is that doing publication indexing can be a multi-step process. There's the step of adding the publication code. There's the step of adding a description, if that's something you want. And then there's the step of adding the headings. And all of those things have to occur in a certain order. And you can't, for instance, add general headings to a record before you've added the publication code to which those general headings belong. So having it on a single form and not a step-by-step process has some issues associated with it. But we do know that we could do some compromise of having some ability to do publication management from the update form, not taking away the separate publication management area because it's useful, but giving people some choice about, for instance, adding the ability to review and add publication codes from the main update form if they want to. Taking a particular publication that's been added to the record and being able to manage the headings right from the update form is also possible. So a number of things that we could look into if it was desired to try and streamline that process so that data managers don't necessarily have to go to two different forms in order to do that management, not taking away the separate form, but sort of an addition for those for whom it would be helpful. We know that we need an easier way to see how a publication is being used. When you go into the publication management area, yes, you can see a count of how many records are using that publication, right? This publication is being used by 84 program records. but it really doesn't do a good job of giving an overall picture of all the different ways that that publication is being used. It doesn't list the views that might be using it in order to select records for display. It doesn't, it doesn't give that grand overall picture, so it can be more difficult to identify publications and how they're used. For instance, there's no easy way to just bring up a list of codes that are being used in views to see which publication codes are attached to records in order to bring up a data set in a view. No way to do that. So we know that we need to be able to give more tools to the data managers to really see how publications are being used, and hopefully that would help in the management of publications where we don't have dozens or more publications that really aren't being used anymore. So having stats on, when was the last time I tagged a record to this publication, when, that would tell you potentially no one's touched this publication in an X amount of time. Being able to get that kind of information can really help in keeping the publication list manageable and useful. Okay. This one is a training issue, I think. We don't really know whether people are aware of or know how to use the synchronization tools for headings. So I'm going to take a minute here and just explain what I mean by that. And maybe if you have any comments to make, you can let me know. Some time ago, at least a year ago and probably more, we put in tools to allow you to take two different publications and selectively synchronize their headings, meaning make sure that they have similar listings between the two publications. This is done at two levels. So first we have the ability to synchronize by copying headings from one publication to another. So if I'm creating a new publication and I know that another group I've worked with has really similar headings to what I want to use, I have the ability to pick from that list the ones that apply to my particular publication and add them. I can even pick from several different ones, so I can pick another one here. See, it's going to show me in green the ones that I've already added, so the ones that already match between the doctors and 211 telehealth. There's 3 that already match, and if I wanted to add the 4th one, I could. So now I have in my list a number of ones accepting new patients, things that I have added from other other publications into this publication, and those now match each other in that their heading names are exactly the same. I can make use of that in the bulk tools. So if I bring up quick list, I'm going to bring up my 211 telehealth quick list. This is the test site. I don't know the data well, so if you aren't. I can check them all. I can say remove heading. Okay, so besides the ability to add and remove a single heading, I can do synchronized headings to classifications found in. So if I want to match the indexing that I've done to doctors, because we know that I have 4 of the exact same headings that are in that doctor's publication, I can say synchronize to doctors, and any of the records that are found in both publications, it will automatically synchronize to the indexing I've done to that other publication. What this means is you do not have to double index. You don't have to remember every time I add accepting new patients to the doctor's publication, I have to go in and remember to do exactly the same indexing to the 211 telehealth. You can use this synchronize tool. It will automatically look for matching headings and make sure that they're the same. So you only have to pick one as the master that you maintain, and it will automatically copy that indexing to your other publication that has the same heading name. So that's, I don't know if people are aware that that tool is there or how to use it effectively. But the idea behind that tool is to save you from doing the same indexing over and over and over again for headings that may be the same. And ideally, in a perfect world, the way that people would use this is by having a master list of general headings in one publication code, let's say called master, through which they maintain all the indexing for all records. And then using the synchronization tool, you can synchronize master out to all your other publications and therefore only maintain your list of headings one time and automatically populate that out to any of the other publications that you use. There's a question. I'm going to take a moment and follow up with it. Jennifer asks, what if the pub code isn't in that record? Will it add the pub code in the general heading too? No. The first step is they have to both have the publication. So this only applies if you've added that publication code. So if there's a record that has 2-on-1 telehealth and doesn't have doctors, it can't copy anything from doctors because it wouldn't have any headings in it. And likewise, it's not going to copy things from doctors to 2-on-1 telehealth if that 2-on-1 telehealth code isn't in that record. So it still relies on you to do the publications tagging to say this belongs to this set. All it synchronizes is the headings. And it only synchronizes the headings if they are exactly the same. So when we were looking at that copy, you saw that automatic green check mark that came up. That tells you that those headings are synchronized, that they match, and that if you use this other tool, it will automatically match those for you. Does that clarify, Jennifer, or anyone else? If I can clarify that further, let me know. I think this is a tool that both has a sort of a training issue where we need people to know this tool exists and how to use it. And if we need to explain the tool better or make it more obvious that this exists, we need your feedback to let us know how we can make it clearer to people that they can use this existing tool to save themselves, hopefully, a lot of work. So maybe some best practices about how to use it, a bit more documentation in the software, whatever else we might need, would be really good to get some feedback about how we can let people know that this exists and how to use it effectively. Another question from Jennifer. Okay, I have multiple views with identical quick lists. Is there a way to synchronize all the headings at once? Yes! Synchronize tool, any that it matches, it synchronizes. It does them all at once. Isn't that beautiful? You don't even have to think about it. The synchronize tool, any of the ones that had that lovely green check mark where the headings are identified as exactly the same, it will automatically synchronize all of them. So it's not one by one. It's just a one-click process. It will Yay, Jennifer says, I've just saved you tons of work. Yay! So that's what I want to do here is save people tons of work. So we need to maybe work on education here, but if there's something we can change in the software to make it more obvious to you how to use this tool or that it exists, please let us know. Okay, so for those of you who have never used it before, if you go back to your desk this afternoon and start trying to use it, and you come up with any ideas about how we might better structure the tool or give on-screen instructions or whatever else to make it more clear to people how this works, please let me know. All right. Anyone thinks of any other questions, let me know. I'm going to go to the next slide now. Okay, we're almost at the end of this part. All right, known issues. There are a lot with publications and headings. Here we go, still on known issues. Let me read this. Right. So I discussed this a little earlier in the presentation that you can, in your view setup, say that you only want certain publications to show up on your search form, and meaning your quick list, and any drop-downs that you get, your advanced search form, and even when you're adding publications in the bulk tool, it will respect that. But it isn't consistently applied everywhere. So if I've picked, let's say, 5 out of the 300 publications in my database for a particular view, it will apply that to my basic search page and my advanced search page and my bulk tool page. But when I go to view the record and I include the publication field, it still shows all the publication codes in the entire database. There's no way right now for you to only display the publication codes that belong in that view. It's all or none when it actually comes down to displaying in the record. So we know we have an issue with consistently using that limited set of publications that we let people create for their views across all areas of the software. It isn't the same kind of security restriction that we have in other areas. It's a convenience restriction that we have on search forms and in adding the headings, but it doesn't restrict viewing that information or being able to perform a search if you know the ID of those publications. Doesn't in any way restrict that. So we do know that there's some issue in, I guess, making that a consistent application across the entire view if you have done that limitation. That isn't really true for headings, because if you've limited people to just seeing a particular publication's headings, you can truly limit them so that they can't work with anything else. If you're not showing them the publication field, you're just showing them the heading field for that one publication. You could have them just have the management and just the searching of that one set of headings. So that isn't true once we get down to truly limited, what we call a limited view, where you're only allowed to see the headings of the one publication. This is really an issue at the higher level when we're talking about publication codes. For people who pick specific publication codes for a view, they're still going to be able to access all the publication codes in some areas of the software. Finally, and this is a big one for me, and it goes along with the synchronization tool we just talked about, we need to take advantage of the other classification that you do. Tagging with publication codes and headings is a really manual process. And often, as Jennifer said, she has the same quick list in multiple different publications. And she ends up having to maintain those lists multiple times, what are basically the same lists. And that's all a manual tagging process. It's really easy to leave things out. And instead of just saying that, you know, this particular program is an emergency food program one time, she has to say that in the taxonomy, she has to find a way to say that in the thesaurus probably, she has to find a way to say that in her headings, over and over and over again. And we really want to take a step back and say, how can we leverage the indexing that you already have to do and try and automate, or at least make easier the process of doing this kind of indexing. There will always be a place for this kind of custom indexing, because sometimes the taxonomy is too big or too small for what you're trying to do. By too small, I mean people have areas of service where the level of service detail that they have in that specialized area goes beyond even what the very detailed taxonomy has to say. Or they have a client who has very particular opinions on the exact wording, phrasing, etc., that is used for those classifications. So there's always going to be a place for that. But we want to try to ease the data management burden so that you don't have to index again and again and again without leveraging the work that you've already done. So the points here really trying to address that. One potential suggestion is create search criteria for a publication. So saved search. So you might say, if I'm searching under these criteria, I expect at least most of these records that belong to the search criteria are likely to belong in my publication. And using that, you could then have an auto-suggest report that shows you which records that you haven't tagged yet that probably belong in your publication. It can also show you which records you've tagged that maybe don't belong in your publication. So it can also highlight to you ones that you might need to remove from your publication because they no longer apply and don't belong in your publication anymore. So this wouldn't be automated, but it would give you suggestions to try and help make the process of adding and removing records from your publication easier for you. A lot of you already do that exact thing, but you do it on a basis, and you have to remember to do it for each and every publication for which you may have hundreds. So this is just an attempt to make that process easier for you. We can also do that at a really high level. So we could give you your entire list of publications and have counts. You know, we think you have 15 records that should be in this publication and 10 records that shouldn't. And one for each and every publication in your whole database to give you an idea of where you may or may not need to do some management and allow you to then decide where to focus your efforts. Next, have the ability to use different methods for assembling quick lists and subject indexes. So the ability to create a quick list that isn't based on a publication or a general heading. Maybe it's based on you listing some taxonomy terms that you want to have in your quick list. So this goes back to publications having to serve so many purposes. It may be that we want to be a little bit more flexible about how you can do some of these things, like how you can create a quick list. And if creating a quick list using taxonomy codes is more applicable for a particular view and saves you having to create a whole set of general headings when you could just pick out a list of applicable taxonomy codes, might make a big difference in how you maintain that information. Next, general headings, the same thing. So general headings to be listed including taxonomy codes instead of custom headings lists. So this is about the quick list, and this is about creating a general heading that instead of being manually tagged to a record, you say, here's my general heading, automatically include anything that has been indexed to X. So it's really about a general heading, but a general heading that automatically sources from existing indexing that you've done. So in a similar way that we're saying you could create a quick list from existing taxonomy codes, you could potentially create a list of general headings, if you will, things that you might use for print publication or other purposes using, I'm giving the example of taxonomy codes because that's where a lot of people focus their indexing work, but it's something we could look at, different methods. The idea being leverage the indexing you're already doing instead of making you do manual tagging. In the cases where you don't really need a specialized list, you just need to be able to pick some subset of that larger taxonomy indexing that you're already doing. Allow the creation of master lists of headings that can be created and indexed once and used many times in many different publications. This is taking the idea of the synchronized list a little bit farther and trying to make it a little more clear to people about how to use master lists. So I had suggested creating a master publication that had every general heading that you care about that you can then synchronize to many different publications. This is that idea, but a little more structured so that we're really calling it a master list of headings, and that whenever you create a new publication, you will draw from your existing master list of headings, and it would make that whole process of synchronization easier and clearer so that there wouldn't be as much guesswork involved in how synchronization works. So that's actually basically the end of my presentation, because really what I would like to know is how are you using publications and headings? What are the issues you're running into? Any commentary you have on anything that I've already talked about, or anything I haven't addressed today that really is an issue for you, or something you would like to see improved, sort of open at this point. So, and if you have an idea for anything specific to address some of the things I talked about today, feel free to comment. So that's where we are now. I'm actually going to unmute, and you can choose to either type your question or speak, whichever you would like to do. Okay? So I'm going to unmute everybody. So Fair, you're unmuted. All right.
And
Does anyone have
a whole lot louder?
Sorry?
And it's already gotten a lot louder.
I know. I know. You can mute yourself. Keep in mind, if you have background noise going on and you're not actually speaking, you do have the ability to mute yourself as well. So, does anyone have any questions, comments, anything? I know this may lead into print tools, but reminder, we have a session specifically on print stuff. This is really a general section in heading. Okay, I've got one question here. Oh, just Jennifer saying I think she was thinking that come up with some pretty good suggestions for these issues. So hopefully that means we've mostly paid attention to the things that people have been reporting.
And the other thing to note, I guess, Kate, is that members will have the opportunity to rank their choices. So part of the functions of these sessions are so that members, when they see that list of suggested enhancements, that they can sort of recall back to this session and say, ah, yes, those were the things we were talking about, to connect them.
Absolutely, Liz. So we'll post this video, and we're going to have open commentary until probably the end of March, at least until the last session, which is supposed to be around March 1st. And then we will take what we've come up with in these discussions, so the enhancements we already knew we had and anything new that we'll come up with, and do some kind of a prioritizing exercise for members to be able to identify which things are of importance to their organization. It might be, but this matter.
Any other questions for Kate and Chris?
I think just a comment. It's Diane here. A couple of comments. Kate, I was really not familiar at all with the synchronization that you described, so I would certainly be interested in learning more about that and how that might be best be utilized. That sounds fascinating. And when you got to the last section, actually earlier, I thought to myself, my goodness, we have so many classification systems going on now, and why can't these be linked somehow? And then you arrived at that at the last page, and so I appreciate it. It's like, oh my goodness, must be some way that we can tie all of these together, so we don't have so many of them. And so that's certainly useful. And from our perspective in Central East, one of the things we've been wrestling with is, first of all, long lists of pub codes that nobody remembers, or what they're even for anymore, and determining, who has whose. And so that's been sort of an ongoing process for us in Central East. But having an actual ownership or identifying who's actually using it without having to sort of look at the records, and then in part of the process I've been going through with Central East is realizing that some people aren't understanding what that short form means, and they've got it on there for something, their records for something entirely unrelated, so.
Right. So that's all the stuff. I'm sure you were listening to it and going, oh, I know that problem.
Yes, I certainly do.
Yes, right.
Do.
Right. So the ownership thing, and even when it goes back to the notes, I'm really glad, Mayra, that you brought that up, because it even goes back to having those publication notes easily accessible so that people can have that reminder of what on earth that publication was for.
Well, and that's what we found is so few people use those. And so, you're looking at it and going, what on earth was that ever developed for? And people are long gone probably who developed it, and so nobody knows anymore.
Right. And I would bet if we made those publication notes easily usable at the time that you're adding the code, that more people would add notes. I think the issue with the notes right now is they're sitting off in the management area and not actually usable at the time that you're doing the indexing. So why bother adding a note? But if we made those notes available at the time that you're adding the pub code, suddenly those notes are far more useful, and maybe people would be more likely to use them.
I was also not aware of the publication descriptions that you described for us, and that's that I can see being a very, very useful tool, especially for some specialized database work that we do for clients. So that answered a few questions. And the hierarchy for the headings, that's something that's been specifically requested that we weren't able to provide. So all good suggestions here, Kate.
Yeah, these are things that actually hit most people at some point. Certainly databases like yours is where those ownership issues really come into play, though.
Yeah, it's huge.
It can get so out of control, as you are well. Okay, any other comments or questions? keeping in mind that it doesn't end here. You can comment again anytime to me, to Liz, on the board, whenever. So if you think of something after, and you have access to this PowerPoint presentation as a reference as well as the video, so don't feel pressured to sort it out now, but if you have any questions you have for me now. Okay.
And
Jennifer Lindsay had commented about moving the publication descriptions to an extra field. Something we'll have to think about, because you can still get all of the benefit of what we do with publication descriptions in an extra field. And I think now that you can have as many as you want, it's not as much of an issue to keep it in that separate area outside of the regular update form. It's something we have to think about, for sure.
okay, well, any other? Oh, I see more notes from Jennifer.
Yeah, so Jennifer was saying having to scroll all over your form to see the current additional fields. So yeah, that's going to be the issue with the extra fields. You're right, Jennifer, is that you do end up getting then that on all your already very, very full potentially entry form. So that's why it was something to put out there. And if we decide that the publication descriptions really still do have a place and a reason for being there, then we'll just leave things as they are.
Okay, does anyone have any other questions? Anything that comes to mind at the moment? Okay, well, hearing none and seeing no hands raised, Kate, does that meet all your needs in terms of what you wanted from the group today?
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone comes up with, as I say, anything else, or if you, especially around for those of you who go home and try the synchronization tool, if there's anything specific that you think we could do to make it clearer to people how that works, or that tool is there, please let us know.
Okay, well, that's great. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today, and please do consult the posting on the boards for the other sessions that are coming up, and sign up if and when you can. It's great to have your participation, and on behalf of the CIOC V3 Task Force, I'd like to thank you for coming out today and putting your brains to work on a very busy Monday. We appreciate your feedback. It's important to this project. So thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a great
Bye.
afternoon. Bye-bye.